Day 641 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground. So, starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 325,000 military personnel losses, which makes for an additional 750 in the past 24 hours alone. Then as for hardware losses, well, across all metrics, it was a smaller day for Russian losses, with 7 tanks, 3 APVs, and 1 artillery piece. Reason being, the severe weather patterns, which I'll get into shortly, but first of all, we'll start out on the map in Russia, as in a major incident, a plant in Chelyabinsk has been engulfed in flames following a significant explosion. Now, this plant, located approximately 1,700 kilometers from the front line, is a key facility in Russia's defense industry and is renowned for manufacturing engines used for the Russian T-72 and the Russian T-90 tanks. But it also produces the Terminator, or the BMP-T, armored fighting vehicles, and also some self-propelled artillery too. The plant also plays a vital role in repairing and refurbishing armoured vehicles for the army. And what a fireball that one was. So these types of events realistically seem to be Russia's mainstay now, just not being able to keep a lid on their weaponry of any kind. And as for this incident, the reasons for it, they're still being investigated, but it was either A, a safety accident, B, a Ukrainian drone, or C, internal or partisan sabotage, all of which are equally plausible realities. Oh, forgive me. Or D, Private Sigaretov Sigarovich. And I have to say, I'm somewhat certain that at least some of these types of events are as a direct result of internal sabotage, where the oligarch level military contractors are under increasing pressure in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine to output unrealistic quotas for military vehicles. I mean, we've already seen Kremlin officials threaten to send military equipment manufacturers to jail, or even worse, if they don't meet the politically mandated quotas that have been set for them. So these situations generally lead to 2 outcomes, both of which we've seen. So outcome number 1 is the Russian army is force-fed poorer quality hardware, for instance, insufficiently refurbished tanks, just things that are not ideal for the battlefield and barely run. Or the second outcome would be the quote-unquote accidental plant explosions, which leads to some of these very existentially pressured and threatened Russian military contractors getting off the hook and saving their own lives in the process. But no matter which way you look at it, it's a systemically flawed system in Russia that's not actually conducive to Russia's wider goals in Ukraine. Then we'll head a bit more south on the map, but still in Russia, as following the approximately 35 drones fired from Ukraine into Russia yesterday, several more one-way drone flights occurred again today into the Smolensk Oblast and the Oryol Oblast, with the regional governors stating all drones were shot down, as per the usual. And due to what appears to be a limited drone or drone sortie run today, it tends to suggest that it was a recon drone checking for Russian air defense installations and future flight path opportunities. But what I find most fascinating is both oblasts' locations, because they're both 2 oblasts beyond the front line. Which means these latest drones flew right past Russia's first line of air defense in the oblasts of, say, Kursk and Bryansk. As I would certainly expect much more from Russian air defenses, or at least I used to. Then we move into Ukraine proper today, as there has been some severe storm weather with the epicenter near the north of the Black Sea. With this particular footage you see right here actually in Russian-occupied Crimea. Then also this footage you see here is on an undisclosed Ukrainian front line, which also shows the absolute severity of the existing weather patterns as well. Truly blizzard-like. And so this is likely why we see smaller daily stat figures than we do most days, as both sides have to contend with the fierce elements much more so than deal with each other. Then to the northern Donbass we go, as this is an aerial shot of, from a Ukrainian drone, as it spotted the Russian soldier White Walkers, who were largely infantry units only, just before the AFU proceeded to offload drone-dropped munitions on multiple occasions, wreaking havoc on them as they traversed the snowy weather on foot just behind Russian front lines in the Kupiansk direction to the north. Then we'll head down to the more southern or central Donbass, really. So here we go, Avdiivka, as heavy battles do indeed continue. The current word is that it's pretty tough for both sides, and that Russian forces have made an advance south of Avdiivka, but we are waiting for confirmation on that one. Although, interestingly, there was a Russian instructor of the Storm Z or Z units who is currently based in Avdiivka, complaining on Telegram that despite Russia being able to accumulate sufficient artillery fire with a high density of fire rate occurring, Russian artillery is wasting a lot of it, leading to heavy losses for storming Russian infantry units. And to give some wider context to that, the battle around Avdiivka has already been far more costly for the Russian army than in Vuhledar, that Vuhledar black hole of Russian hardware losses that they experienced earlier this year, just in terms of sheer hardware losses. I didn't think that was possible. But what makes it even worse for the Russian forces right now is the AFU's usage of cluster ammunition, something that wasn't available back then during the Vuhledar days, which has a devastating effect on those storming meat waves. Also, somewhere in the east, in the muddy east, a Russian Akatsiya 152mm self-propelled howitzer was destroyed. Then we move across to the most western front, so we are talking, of course, about Kherson, as based on recent footage and reports, Ukrainian forces have been widening their bridgehead to Krinky's east, which is not to be confused with yesterday's update of a new Ukrainian foothold east of Krinky, which was a completely separately spaced apart operation. But in either case, the ongoing Russian attempts to dislodge Ukrainian troops at this particular area in the east, or both of them, has just failed. But what I find most interesting about this region right now is the Russian tactics. For instance, there was a recent account from a Russian conscript unit holding positions in front of the Aleshki Sand, so over there. However, this conscript unit refused to fight. So what happened next was that the Russian command moved them back and replaced them with special forces. And can you imagine that? Because they've moved a special forces unit right into the front lines to be used as cannon fodder. And the special forces unit of which was shortly thereafter obliterated by Ukrainian artillery. So generally speaking, the Russian special forces unit is irreplaceable in Russia today. And so to have them step into the front lines like this, only to be taken out, simply speaks to the desperation of the southern Russian commanders who will do anything to plug the gaps on the front lines in an effort to not lose any ground. And it should hardly come as a surprise by now, yet the shockingly low regard that the Russian army seems to have for the value of life remains utterly astonishing. Then, more generally in the south, as per the usual, the Russian forces did lose some more equipment. For instance, this Kamaz 63968 Typhoon K vehicle that's worth more than $1 million, just destroyed by an FPV drone. Now, these are multifunctional, modular, armored, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, but even with impressive protection credentials like that, it stood no chance. Then, aside from that, a Russian Tiger vehicle was hit. But I've got to hand it to the Russians in this case, as the Russian Tiger 4x4 multi-purpose all-terrain infantry mobility vehicle has not been seen much at all in the past 12 months. Although, to be fair, in this situation, this one doesn't have any future to speak of now either. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So we'll start out again with some Ukrainian hardware news, as the Ukrainians stop at nothing to research, design, then serial produce all sorts of long-range drones that we've never even heard of before. Take this one for example, because recently Ukrainian developers showcased one of their latest drone creations called the Mammoth, as a reference to its high payload and long-range capabilities. And so the engineers had a bit of a sense of humor about it all, saying, quote, "Dear ones, be welcome. We have another combat drone replenishment. We didn't tell anyone for a long time so as to not jinx it. We tested, improved, treated childhood diseases until we raised this healthy man. It was named after the largest horse in history." Hopefully something was lost in translation there though, because mammoths were a sort of a prehistoric elephant, if I'm fairly quite sure with that one. But anyway, so with that sort of a statement, there's a lot of metaphors in there, as they clearly sound quite proud and accomplished with ironing out all the kinks and making it not only ready for deployment, but also already having live environment in-field success. Then moving on, as for a speculative hardware update, there's lots of renewed reports about the armed forces of Ukraine having more active tanks at the moment than the Russian forces. Which doesn't come as too much of a surprise, because nearly 5 months ago, Bloomberg put out a report after some analysis stating that this was pretty much the case back then as well. And the graph you see here, apart from being terribly awkward to read, was produced by Bloomberg at the beginning of July. And take it all with a grain of salt, if you like, but the vast majority of Ukrainian deployed tanks, whether they're the older Soviet designs or newer NATO inventory, they all have one key point of difference to most of their Russian counterparts. That being, they've all been maintained properly and stored correctly, and even the older T-62 tanks Ukraine received as donations from other countries, they've been kitted out with upgraded new optics, barrels, armor, and engines. Then in some more news, Ukraine's security service advised that it received information through Russian and Chinese call intercepts that showed secret discussions of building a tunnel underneath the Crimean Bridge to connect Russian occupied Crimea with Russia's mainland, which is the Krasnodar Krai Oblast. And so discussions like these, of course, speak to Russia's long-term aspirations to hold on to Crimea as it becomes increasingly concerned about the long-term survivability of the Kerch Bridge itself, as it now has to contend with the prospect of long-range aviation drones, cruise missiles, other various ballistic missiles, other water or naval drones, but also the dire prospect of underwater Ukrainian drones that are hard to intercept. Then in some other news, there's been a bit of recent news covering how Putin has stated that he is ready to end the war, with negotiations at an upcoming G20 summit hoped for. For instance, with this story, in a virtual meeting a few days ago, he stated, quote, "Military actions are always a tragedy, and of course, we should think about how to stop this tragedy." Which is really rich coming from him, but I'll give him a chance on this topic, as we all should. So I'm right there with you, Putin. Let's legitimately end this tragedy. Although from the Russian or Putin perspective, there's just one little hair in the soup to get to peace, or a few hairs in the soup actually. And in my compiling of them over time, Russian outlines for future negotiations go a little something like this. So firstly, Russia gets to keep all of the captured land it's claimed in Ukraine, including Crimea. Secondly, Ukraine can only have a military force of about 90,000 or less. Thirdly, as part of the peace plan, Ukraine cannot join NATO. And last but not least, Putin and Russia gets completely exonerated from any wrongdoings, any war crimes, any reparations to pay back, also the unfreezing of Russian assets globally, and also economic sanction removals as they're currently imposed on Russia. And so conditions like that are more hair than soup. But perhaps most problematically is that Ukraine would be barred from joining NATO as a member, meaning that after Russia gets its much needed operational pause to build back up, militarily speaking, there's really nothing stopping them from invading all over again. But hey, don't take my word for it, take Russia's. With their repeated violations of former peace treaties, accords, and agreements, such as the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, the Russo-Ukrainian Friendship Treaty of 97, the 2003 Azov Sea and Kerch Strait Agreements, the Russian-Ukrainian State Border Treaty Agreements of 2004, oh, and I almost forgot, the Minsk I Agreement and the Minsk II Agreements. And that's just for Ukraine and Russian relations. It doesn't include examples of broken agreements as it pertains to Russia and other countries. Then, of course, there's Russia's Soviet history. When they violated the 45 UN Charter, the 70 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the 74 Helsinki Accords, and the 91 Belarus Accords. So, the only thought that comes to my mind right now is a quote from a British romantic comedy called Love Actually that emphasizes the dynamic of how bullies only respond to strength. Oh, and romantic comedy or not, that is one entertaining film for those of you who haven't seen it. Also included with an entertaining scene that includes Mr. Bean's Rowan Atkinson. But I digress. And the moral of the story for this news piece is something I used to say almost every video a long time ago. You cannot trust Russia by its words, only by its actions. Then moving across to another quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So, in the pride of the Russian automobile industry, a Russian video blogger who likes to take apart cars to look at what's underneath took apart a claimed Russian-built car from the Russian car brand Moskvich. Although, as he proceeds to take it apart, he finds out that, he finds out the sad truth of the event. It's 99.9% parts from the Chinese automobile manufacturer JAC. And so this guy goes on to state specifically how everything is Chinese componentry down to the nuts. So the only nut found to be in it was any Russian driving it. Oh, and then further than that, he even voices his concerns about the safety level of the vehicle, which is quite telling when a Russian person questions car safety, because that's a whole nother story. Just wow. The Russian domestic car manufacturing industry is shot. But more embarrassingly, once again, Russia is trying to pass off another country's work as its own. Classic Russia. So that will be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. And yeah, I really do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. I might not be back tomorrow, but certainly if not, then the day after. But thanks again, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.